Check, 1, 2. All right. Good morning, everyone. I am so excited to be here in Sydney. I count this as a real honor and a privilege to be here as part of the NDC Conference. And as you can tell, I'm from the States. I'm from the deep south of the States in the state of Georgia. So I speak fluent redneck. I hope you can understand my English, my version of English. My name is Neal, and you can trust me because I have a beard, and I ride a motorcycle, and I consume lots of bacon and caffeine. And I've got my family here with me. We've had just an incredible time for the past week. We came in a little bit early, and yeah, Sydney has been awesome. I wish we could see more of Australia, except for these guys. What is up with these little annoying critters? We try to go see the Sydney Opera House, and we're just attacked constantly by these guys. So, to start off, I wanted to tell you that JavaScript has won the web. You just got through with Scott Hanselman's talk. He may have even, I wasn't in there, but he may have even said this phrase. He's talked about many times about JavaScript being the lingua de franca of the web. We all like to bash on JavaScript, right? It's not the language we would choose, but it's the language we deserve. And Atwood's law, any application that can be written in JavaScript will eventually be written in JavaScript. And if you just search for JS Linux, that's an entire Linux operating system running in the browser, which is insane. And Douglas Crockford, on a speaker panel at one conference, said JavaScript is tragically important. And if you remember, or if you know, Douglas Crockford is the author of one of the most important books in JavaScript, JavaScript: The Good Parts, which is suspiciously smaller than any other JavaScript book out on the market. So it's JavaScript: The Good Parts, just a very short book. So this talk is about Node.js, a little bit from my perspective as a .NET developer, and we're going to talk about why Node.js, why should we even consider using Node.js as a technology, and a bit of a crash course, some tools and frameworks that I have found that are great to use with Node, and maybe some integration strategies with some existing .NET code. And of course, Node.js over the last few years has completely exploded. Unless you've been under a rock, you've seen just an incredible uptick and lots of buzz about Node.js. It is an amazing technology. It is JavaScript on the server, so it's JavaScript based. It's promises that you can focus on a single language from back end to front end. So if you are, how many would consider themselves web developers? Yeah, a vast majority of you. So we already deal with JavaScript on the front end. JavaScript on the back end is a pretty interesting premise. Node.js is built on the Chrome V8 JavaScript engine, and is very, very fast and efficient. V8, as has been in the past the fastest JavaScript engine. I don't know if they can make that claim anymore. Microsoft Chakra has got some pretty impressive benchmarks, and you can even use Chakra with Node.js. I think there's a shim where you can swap out the JavaScript engines. But the V8 engine is very similar. You might say that, well, JavaScript is dynamic. It's not a compiled language. Well, if you think about it, .NET is not necessarily a compiled language either. When you compile .NET, it's turned into IL, and it's only just-in-time compiled when it's executed. In the same fashion, JavaScript, when it's first executed in Node, is also just-in-time compiled and is running as machine code. So it's just as fast and efficient at runtime as is .NET. Now, the interesting thing about Node.js and the JavaScript engine is that it's an asynchronous event loop. So your code is, you kind of fall into an asynchronous development pattern. Not that you can't do async and await and all those types of things with .NET, but the kind of the patterns that we've been presented and that we've learned in .NET over the years has been a very synchronous pattern. Whereas in Node.js, when you're looking at all the code samples and you're using callbacks and promises and those kinds of things, you're falling into an asynchronous pattern. And this single-threaded event loop, it sounds counterintuitive, but because of the context switching and stuff that you don't have to deal with multi-threading, it can actually be very, very efficient and handle concurrency really well. The Node.js community has just exploded. Last time I checked, there were over 250,000 modules available for Node.js, compared to somewhere around 60,000 NuGet packages. The community has embraced Node.js because it is JavaScript, regardless of your background, whether you're PHP, .NET, Java. Because if you're a web developer, JavaScript is a language that and it has attracted web developers from all other platforms to jump on board with Node.js. And it's been very, very successful. And then Microsoft themselves has been also involved with Node.js. So they were involved early on with Node.js and making sure that Node can run on the Windows platform. Node.js is a first-class citizen in Azure. They make it really, really easy to deploy Node.js applications in Azure, and all the Azure services have first-class Node.js libraries that you can use to do things like the message bus and other types of services that are available. And one thing I'd like to say is that Node.js JavaScript is not your dad's JavaScript. So we all bash on JavaScript being this language that we all love to hate. But in regards to Node.js, the latest version of Node, you can take advantage of all the great features of like ES 2015 or ES6. 6.3 of Node.js is 95% ES6 or ES 2015 compliant. So almost everything that you can, except for maybe tail call optimizations, is available if you're building on Node. So you can do things like, the fat arrow syntax, you can do spread operators, you can do all these great new features that are in the ES6 language. And it is a awesome, it's a whole new world, in terms of JavaScript. That's really, really awesome. So a little bit of background about me. I've been a .NET developer since the early days of .NET. I was at the PDC conference in 2000 when .NET was announced. They gave every attendee this book called Presenting C#, and being the nerd that I am, I went back to the hotel room and I read that entire book, and I knew that I wanted to be a .NET developer, that this C# language is really awesome. So I've been doing .NET and C# for forever. I work for this company called LeanKit. We do Kanban software, and our stack has been traditionally Microsoft. So it's MVC and C#. We use SQL Server and then Hibernate. And we've got a whole spaghetti of JavaScript and jQuery type code, and just about every jQuery plugin on the planet is embedded in our application at one time or another. Which has led to a lot of really, as we've scaled and as we've grown, has led to some, really hard spaghetti code to decipher, some really challenging problems with just the Microsoft framework, and there's been a lot of frustration in maintaining the application that we have. And to be honest, the stack of technologies that we have, we've even started to run into scalability issues. Not that .NET isn't capable of scaling, but just the choices that we've made over the years, the things that are embedded in our system became really, really difficult for us to scale. And so JavaScript for us is a strategically important language. Since we are a SaaS product and we build a web application, JavaScript is really, really important. And it became clear to us that we needed to be JavaScript experts. And Node.js seems to be, just reinforces our ability to build great web applications. From a recruiting standpoint, Node.js has been awesome because, the community of JavaScript developers now, instead of, in our market where my company is based, in Nashville, Tennessee, the .NET community, it's a large community, but there's so much demand on good talent in our community that it's hard to recruit really good .NET developers. But if we're using Node.js and are able to use JavaScript, then we can also pull in pretty much anybody from any background, any web-based technology. So we now have people who have come from Ruby backgrounds, from Java, from PHP, and that's a good thing because they're bringing in these, this polyglot experience, all these ideas and concepts, these patterns, libraries, and so forth that they have learned on these other platforms, and they're helping us to be much better at what we do. And we have found that in building some of our services with Node.js, that it is just a much more productive environment. There's much less friction. We're doing things like test first, test-driven development. We're building microservices. We're able to take advantage of other technologies like RabbitMQ and Riak and Redis, and the fact that it's cross-platform and we can do things like Dockerize our applications and we can deploy to Linux servers and all those kinds of advantages. We have, our DevOps guys really love the fact that they can take our Docker containers and Vagrant and all those other technologies and be able to easily deploy those things into production. So this has been more of the reaction that a couple of years ago we decided to run an experiment and do some projects with Node.js, and my team was one of the first teams to do that. And within a couple of weeks of into this project we were doing, I asked all the other developers, well, how do you feel about Node.js so far? And it was just high fives everywhere. It was we were just loving the technology, loving the less friction with building applications, and we haven't looked back. Now we still give our developers the choice. If they want to build a .NET application, they're building a certain feature or a certain service, they have the choice of building it in .NET or Node.js, but by far most of our developers are building services in Node.js. There are a number of great articles out on the web. This one is why Node.js is becoming the go-to technology in the enterprise. And this resonated with us as well as a lot of other companies that I've talked to that have gone the route of using Node.js. And it's rapid innovation delivery, developer happiness, being able to attract and retain talent. It's a new shiny thing, so to speak. So people are excited about working with Node.js, and JavaScript is just, it's just a great skill to have, regardless of being Node.js or not. And performance has just been amazing. To me, Node.js exemplifies start with the simplest solution that works and do one thing and do it well. Node.js is essentially a JavaScript execution platform. There's not a whole lot that's built into Node.js itself. There's like some file system capabilities, some networking capabilities, but that's it. The rest of it is all NPM or modules that you can pull in to make Node do whatever you want it to do. Some of the Node.js use cases, single page apps, API, real-time streaming, all these are great examples. Proxy service, we'll talk a little bit more about that later as part of an integration strategy. But I like to say that Node.js is, it's anything you want to do that's connected to the internet, Node.js is the perfect solution for. And in particular, Node.js from the very beginning, for years now, has supported things like real-time streaming and WebSockets, and is really, really great at creating those modern, push type experiences on the web. So if you're pushing data to mobile apps or in real-time type applications on the web, Node.js is a great solution for that. And I'm happy to say that Node.js is more than just back-end. Node.js has typically been just a back-end server for doing API and web-related things, but there's a lot more you can do with Node than that. You can create automation scripts. Since it is just a JavaScript execution, you can create lots of automation things for like DevOps. You can create command line tools using NEXE. I've used this to create a number of utilities for applications, and you can create desktop apps using either Node WebKit or Electron. Electron is one of my favorite new technologies, and it's so awesome. So Electron was built for Atom by GitHub, and is the desktop shell that a number of applications have been created on. How many here use Slack? Well, if you've used Slack on the desktop, you've probably used an Electron application. And then Visual Studio Code. This was a huge eye-opening experience for me. When I saw Visual Studio Code, I'm thinking, well, wow, Microsoft has figured out how to get .NET to run on Mac and Linux and create a desktop app. Well, they didn't use .NET. They used Electron. They used Node and Chrome, which is what Electron is built on. If you want to learn more about Electron, there's I think maybe more than one talk here this week, but I know there's a talk tomorrow at 11:40 on writing desktop applications using web technologies. And if anyone's interested, I'm actually giving a talk on Electron tomorrow night at the Sydney Node.js meetup. There are quite a few case studies of successful Node.js implementations or migrations from platforms to Node.js. Fandango, which is a ticket sales for like movie tickets in the States, they have moved from .NET to Node.js, and their experience was much like ours, dramatically shorter development cycles. They're moving toward a microservices architecture, flexibility and deployment. All those things are just great benefits of moving to Node.js. PayPal is another great case study. This is a company who ran an experiment when they first started looking at Node.js. They're a Java based, traditionally, but they're looking at Node.js, and they decided to have one team create this new application in Java and another team create it in Node so that they can compare, the experiences between the two. And what they found was when they built the Node.js app, they created it 2 times faster with fewer developers. They had less code and fewer files. They had a huge performance improvement over the Java app, and also this great performance in average response time. What's so interesting to me about this particular case study is that PayPal had been doing Java for years, and so the team who is creating this Java application, the Java equivalent, they should be Java experts, and yet this team who had just for the first time touched Node.js, they were able to create a much better application just right out of the gate. And so they've since switched to Node.js completely and have had great success. Walmart is another great case study. Walmart is, I'm sure you've probably heard of them. They're one of the biggest retailers. They ran their experiment on Black Friday 2013. I don't know if you know what Black Friday is, but it's like the #1 shopping day of the year in the States. It's the day after Thanksgiving holiday, and what better time to run an experiment than your heaviest shopping day of the year? but they switched their mobile platform to using Node.js, and they had just phenomenal results. They had 200 million concurrent users, and their servers that were running Node.js hardly broke a sweat. And they also experimented with deploying live updates during Black Friday without any trouble. So who else is using Node.js? There are lots and lots of organizations that are using Node.js today. If you search for a Node.js industry, I think on Node.js.org, you can see a long list of companies and organizations that are now using Node.js either primarily or as a major part of their infrastructure. As I mentioned, DevOps is loving us as internally with Node.js because of its small footprint and being cross-platform. It's very event-driven, so this DevOps movement that we have in software development, there's already a number of packages available for Node that do all the kinds of monitoring and events that DevOps is really interested in seeing as part of the health of your application. So there's the open source community, because it is so popular, there just seems to be a huge number of tools and options available to you to help drive a DevOps type of environment. Now, I don't know if you can read this, but it says, this is a chart from another article, What is Node.js Used For? The 2015 Node.js Overview Report. The title of this chart is, How long have you worked with Node.js, and do you like your job? So over time, it seems like the more you work with Node.js, the happier as a developer you are, because of the less friction, the number of tools that are available, the packages, just the whole overall experience is just a great place to be. Installing Node.js is really, really easy. You can go to nodejs.org, click a big green download link and run the installer. Or how many here are familiar with Chocolatey? Awesome, good number of you are. I'm surprised at how many people are already familiar with Chocolatey, but this is one of my favorite tools. You can see that I'm running on a Mac, but I have VMs for Windows that I still maintain a lot of .NET applications and so forth. So each time I spin up a new Windows VM, I use Chocolatey to install a lot of my baseline of tools. And so to install Chocolatey, you just go to chocolatey.org. There's like one thing that you need to install to get it running, and then from the command line you can do things like choco install nodejs.install. And as I mentioned before, when you install Node.js, it really is just a JavaScript execution engine. It's just, Node.js is not anything fancy. It is two command line utilities basically. One is Node itself, which is you can type node space and then some JavaScript file to execute it. And the other is NPM. NPM is the Node package manager. It's kind of the NuGet equivalent. This is how you use NPM to install packages out of the NPM registry. Two dependencies you should be aware of with Node.js is Node.js is cross-platform compatible. So you can run Node.js on Windows, on Mac, on Linux, and most of the modules that you may use are pure JavaScript, but there's also a chance that some of the modules you use have C libraries that need to be compiled on the machine or on the architecture that you're running on. So in that case, there's two things you need. You'll need Python version 2, some version of Python 2, and you'll need some type of C compiler. Most recently, you can either, if you don't already have Visual Studio installed, you can use Choco install Microsoft build tools, or you can install the build tools from directly, or you can download Visual Studio Community 2015. And with that C++ compiler, you can build those native extensions or those native modules for Node. And if you're running Node.js, or if you're running Visual Studio already, there's an open source Node.js tools that you can install that give you some project templates and some other things. Minimum requirements are you need Visual Studio 2012 Pro or one of the free community editions. You will need the latest versions of Visual Studio updates. Or you can, if you have MSDN subscription, you have access to a lot of Azure resources. You can spin up an Azure VM that already has Visual Studio and the Node.js tools already installed, so that you can use that as your sandbox to play around with Node.js in Visual Studio. With that, I'm going to show you just a brief view of what those Node.js tools look like in Visual Studio. Well, got to stop this first. All right, so I have Visual Studio open here, and I know it's very small. I'll zoom in when I need to. So I'm going to start a new project. And with the Node.js tools installed, you'll see that under JavaScript, there's a number of project templates that are now available under Node.js. And those, it can be from existing Node.js code to starter Express applications. Express is arguably the most popular web framework or starting point for building web applications with Node.js. And there's also a number of Azure applications that are available. I'm just going to choose the basic Node.js Express 4 application. All that's fine. It's going off and creating the application. Now, unfortunately, I won't be able to show you everything because the wireless here is a little bit on the downside. But after this is created, I do want to show you at least a couple of things about creating an application in Visual Studio. So when this comes up, we've got our project and our app.js file, which is kind of like the bootstrap for this Express application. What Node.js tools for Visual Studio gives me is the ability to set breakpoints and gives me a great debugging experience straight from Visual Studio. So I can fire this up in my browser. I would hit that breakpoint, and I can inspect those variables. I can set watches. I can look at the call stack. All those things that you would expect from as a .NET developer being able to use. You can also interact with the JavaScript language as well. Now, unfortunately, when you can see this over here, all these things are missing, and that is because when you install a Node.js application, there's this metadata stored in this file called package.json, and right now it's attempting to go out to the internet and pull in those packages that are referenced, just like NuGet packages, right? So it's going and trying to download those packages and make them available to this application. Unfortunately, it's not able to do that. But I can show you that if you right-click on npm, there's this install npm packages dialog that comes up, and very similar to NuGet, it's all cached locally, so I updated it last night. I can do things like I can search for Lodash, and I can choose Lodash or underscore. Those are popular JavaScript frameworks, and I can install those directly into my Node.js application, adding it to the package.json by default. That means it's storing that metadata as a package. And so it's very much like a NuGet type environment for installing Node.js packages. What I want to show you right now is I've got this exact same project pretty much in Visual Studio Code. So this is actually running on my Mac, not in the Windows VM, but it looks identical. So if you bring up Visual Studio Code on Windows or Visual Studio Code on Mac or Linux, these are the exact same UIs, and it's really, really good. So I almost never use Visual Studio anymore, like Visual Studio 2015, unless I'm actually working on a .NET application that I need to maintain. If I'm doing any Node.js development at all, I'm either using Visual Studio Code or something like Sublime Text. Visual Studio Code is really, really refreshing. It's fast, and it's really powerful. So just like Visual Studio, I can set breakpoints anywhere in the code, and I get IntelliSense. If anybody here use TypeScript? So you got TypeScript capabilities in Visual Studio Code, and you can get IntelliSense to those TypeScript definitions. And I can switch over here to debug and fire up this application. I can switch over to, say, Firefox and say localhost 3000. And now I've just hit the breakpoint here on this particular route. And I can mouse over and inspect those variables. I can see all the properties and functions that are on that variable. I've got a call stack over here on the left. I can set watch points. So Visual Studio Code, and I also get like the step over and step into and all those kinds of things that you would expect from a debugging standpoint. So it's really, really awesome. So we talked about Visual Studio Code, Linux, Mac, and Windows. It's considered code assistant, so it doesn't have the full capabilities of like Visual Studio, but it is really, really great environment for JavaScript. I've continually been impressed with Visual Studio Code's ability to create Node.js projects and debug JavaScript. So some core concepts about Node.js that you should be aware of. NPM, we talked about it being a Node package manager. So when you're creating a new project from scratch, if you're not using like the project templates that are in Node, the Node.js tools in Visual Studio, you're going to want to create a project for your application and start by using npm init. And this is going to step you through some questions to say, is this the name of your project? And it's going to create a project.json file at the end with some of your information about your project. And then from there, you would use npm to install packages. So in this case, I'm installing Lodash, and I'm using --save to save that dependency in the package JSON file. As I mentioned before, the JavaScript that you use in Node.js is a little bit different from what you may be using on the front end. So some core concepts about Node.js is when you're requiring Node.js uses CommonJS for dependencies and for modular JavaScript. So require is kind of like the imports or using statement. In this case, require with just the name of the module is how you would reference built-in Node.js modules. In this case, we're using the FS, which is a file system. It allows us to read and write files in Node.js. It also, with the same kind of syntax, we can reference modules that have been installed by npm. So require express would be how we would reference the Express framework for Node that we used npm install for. And then if you're creating your own modules, you provide a relative path to that module, and that's how you reference it in other JavaScript modules. And in some cases, your modules may be have constructor functions. It's just a common JavaScript thing. So instead of creating after you require it in as an object, then you might want to create an instance of it using the constructor function, or you might say var service equals new my service. And then a very, very common pattern in Node.js is using callbacks. So if you're calling a method on a JavaScript function, a JavaScript object like service.some method, then you're going to pass in any number of parameters that are required by that object or by that method, and then you're going to pass in a callback function. And that is, this is part of that being courteous of the single-threaded event loop. It's like, I'm going to call this function, and you handle when you're going to execute that function. When you're done, then call back this callback function that I'm providing as the last parameter. So the common pattern is to use a callback that starts with error, which is the error object, and then whatever additional results may be being returned from that callback. So we check the error, do something if we have that error. There are a couple of different module patterns that are common with Node.js. This one is just using plain JSON. So we've got a module, sample module 1.js, and it's got a couple of functions in it, a convert to Celsius and a convert to Fahrenheit. And then at the end, we've got this JSON object literal. It's got some properties like the freezing Celsius and freezing Fahrenheit, boiling, and then we've got our two functions. Here's where the magic happens in the common JS module framework is somewhere in your module you need to set your exports. And here we're saying our exports is this JavaScript object. So when sample module 1 is used somewhere else in Node.js, it's going to see the freezing and boiling properties, and it's going to see those two functions, and that's all it's going to see. Another common pattern is to use a constructor function, and here we're requiring in the file system object, and then we've got this one function that takes in a parameter called a path, and inside this function we're going ahead and we're reading the config data from that file that was provided from the path, and we're parsing that as JSON, and then we've got a number of functions. The implementation details are not so important, but we've got a get, a set, a save, and then we've got some internal function, and then we're returning from this constructor function what we want to expose to the outside world. So we're returning the get and the set and the save, and then we're setting that constructor function as our module.export. So when we use this in some other area of our Node.js application, we're going to create an instance of it using the require. We're going to use that path, pass in a path, and then the object that we get at the end is an object that just has get, set, and save, exposed. How many here use SQL Server in your .NET? So for me, Node.js for many years was a non-starter. I kind of dismissed Node.js because SQL Server was not very well supported. Once SQL Server was supported, then I became a huge, I started using Node.js more, and I became a huge fan. I'm a SQL database nerd. I've been using SQL Server since the late 90s. So it's an important piece of technology to me. So Seriate is one of the several Node.js modules that's available for SQL Server. It's my favorite. So I get asked this a lot. So I included some of these slides in my talk just to talk a little bit about how easy it is to get started with SQL Server. So Seriate, you'll have some kind of config setting your database connection properties, and then you can do things like Seriate is based on finite state machines and promises, so you can do some really interesting things about I want to execute this SQL code, and the results that I get back from that SQL statement, I want to execute another SQL statement. I can chain SQL statements together in like step 1, step 2, step 3, and then do something interesting with the whole chain of executions at the end. and then I can wrap it up into, you have like a catch statement for any errors that happen. And if you want to know more about Seriate, if you go to my blog, reverentgeek.com, I've got an article out there on titled Painless SQL Server with Node.js using Seriate. So a little information about deploying. Typically, when you deploy a Node.js application, you don't include the Node modules folder. So this is a special folder that's created when you're installing packages. So when I do an npm install Lodash or npm install Express, it puts everything in this Node modules folder. If there are native modules for, say I'm developing on a Mac, and those native modules get compiled, I don't want to deploy Node modules because it may be the wrong architecture or the wrong, native modules for wherever, I might be deploying to a Linux machine. So typically you're going to deploy to the server and then run npm install on that server so that it pulls down all the packages and compiles them for that particular server. Unless you're going to create, you have like CI servers that are the exact same architecture that you have in production. So we do this where we have build servers that are the same architecture, and they're going to do the job of pulling down those npm packages and building them, and then we'll take and zip all that stuff up and move it into production. As I mentioned before, Azure is really, really easy to deploy to, and then on Windows, if you're deploying Node.js applications, you're going to use something like IIS Node to host. You can, if you're just doing a web application, IIS Node allows you to host a Node.js application in IIS. And if you're going to be deploying services where you need to start and stop those services and automatically restart if something fails, Windsor is a great tool for doing that. So when you're installing a Node.js application on a Windows machine that's going to live on its own, which can be a web application or it could be like a microservice, Windsor is a great way to do that. And then on Linux, there are a number of options available. We use one called Forever, and it does the same kind of thing where it creates a daemon so that you can host that application and make sure that if it crashes, it's going to automatically restart and all those kinds of things. Hosting Node.js on Azure, you can do something as simple as create a brand new web app, empty Node.js application, and then point that to a repository. This is what I do for a number of my personal Node.js projects, including my blog, is I can just point Azure to a GitHub repository, and then anytime I push an update to that repository, to the branch that it's looking for, it can be the master branch or it can be some other branch on that repository, it will automatically detect that change and pull down the latest from that repository and redeploy my Azure website for me, so that within less than a minute, typically, I've got that version of my Node.js application running. And if you want to learn more about that, I've also got a blog post on my website about hosting Node.js on Azure. Recommended tools. So Lodash is a great set of JavaScript utilities. You're probably already familiar with Lodash or underscore. If you're going to do JavaScript promises, Win, there's a number of them. Win is my favorite. Async is kind of like your task parallel library, your TPL for Node.js. It gives you the ability to execute many JavaScript functions in parallel or in serial, so that you can say, I want to do all these 10 things and just let me know when all 10 things are done so I can move on. If you're going to make external calls to other APIs and REST services, Request is a great module for that. Gulp, of course, there's lots of debate on what the best build and test runner and all those kinds of things are. Gulp or Grunt, both are great. I prefer Gulp. Socket.io is a great library for doing that real-time socket WebSocket type implementations. Node Inspector for debugging is really awesome. When you install Node Inspector, you can launch your Node.js applications using node-d, instead of typing node space index.js or whatever your application starting point is, you can do node-debug app.js or index.js, and that will launch your application with the Chrome dev tools open so that you can use Chrome. I mean, Visual Studio Code is really, really good, but before Visual Studio Code, I was using Node Inspector to do node debugging on the client side. Mocha and Chai and Sign-On, those are great testing frameworks for doing like a TDD or BDD style of development. And again, there just seems to be so much less friction with doing a test-driven development style approach to development. I don't know what your experience has been like, but there have been, over the years in my career, I've gotten like, okay, this time, we're really going to do test-driven development. And a .NET project starts, we're doing everything TDD, and at some point the wheels just fall off. It just gets so hard to maintain the test that you end up, well, we got to ship this, we got to get this out the door, we don't have time to fix all these broken tests, and you just start to comment out tests or disable them, and then you just give up. It's like you throw your hands up. That's not been the case with the Node.js projects that we've done. It's been really, really awesome, and so much less friction in maintaining those tests. There are a lot of Node.js frameworks available for doing web apps and API. We've talked about Express. It's like I said, if you pick up a book on Node.js or watch any videos, almost all of them are going to point you to Express, but that's not the only option. Happy is a really awesome framework built by Walmart. That's what they use for all their production stuff, and it's all open source. I've got a couple of good friends that have worked on Happy that used to work for Walmart and have been contributors to that. Meteor and Sales. If you want to do just strict API work, Restify is really good. Loopback, which is from Strong Loop, IBM now owns them. They have built in like push notifications for mobile apps as part of their API. My company has a bunch of open source projects out on Linkit Labs, one of those being AutoHost and Hyped. It's a hypermedia based approach to doing APIs in Node.js. And you can find a lot more out on Node Framework and nodewebmodules.com. There's kind of like a curated list of lots and lots of frameworks that are available. Another thing I want to tell you about is this tool called Edge.js. Edge.js allows you to run .NET in process with Node.js. And it's not just about C#, but you can run F#, ADO.NET, you can even do Python and PowerShell. So this could be a way of bridging existing .NET code with your Node.js applications. It was built by the guy who created IIS Node, the guy who worked at Microsoft that made sure that Node.js could run on Windows in the first place. So this is a really interesting tool. Allows you to execute inline code, or you can reference like CS files or even existing .NET assemblies. And it's a great alternative to writing native modules. Instead of having to write them in C, you could write them in .NET or leverage some existing .NET libraries that you have. It does require .NET 4.5 or Mono 3.1, and that's because those are when async and await were introduced, because you can't do any blocking calls on Node.js. Remember, you've got that single-threaded event loop. If you're using synchronous blocking calls for .NET, then you're halting the thread that you have. So all your code has got to follow the async and await pattern, which may mean that if you have existing .NET code that you want to leverage through Edge.js, you might have to wrap those with some async and await, create like a wrapper library around that existing code so that you can use them. So what can you do with Edge.js? Well, you can, as I mentioned, you can leverage some of your .NET investment. You can do things like you can do things like Microsoft services that don't get a whole lot of love in the Node.js community. So there are a lot of modules that are available for Microsoft types things, but most of them are half-baked and abandoned. So .NET is still going to be your best clients for some of these Microsoft applications. If you want to do Active Directory, or you want to, in some cases, maybe .NET has better hardware support for particular drivers or Win32 drivers. And then not that there aren't great modules already for Node for doing like video encoding and CPU intensive work. So those are like native, those are like C libraries that are being compiled for Node. But if you've got some very specific things that you want to be able to do with Node that are CPU intensive, then .NET may be a great alternative. And then PowerShell is an interesting option for doing some like automation of DevOps type things. Some Node.js integration strategies. Node.js is a proxy, so this is how a lot of these organizations have introduced Node into their stack of technologies. Walmart and PayPal, these guys have, what they've done is they've first created a proxy API, which is everything that you can talk to, right? And it's sometimes referred to as the strangulation pattern, where you have some things are implemented in Node and some things are just handed off to whatever legacy backend system that you're still having to use for a while. And then slowly you're migrating those features and functionality to Node.js over time. So you might use Node.js as a proxy, and even using Edge.js to be able to call into some of those legacy, if you want to call them legacy, .NET applications or services, so that as you're starting to recreate those things or create new ones in Node.js, you can do that. If you need to call into other web API, maybe you're using ASP.NET Web API for some of your things, you can use request module to call into those APIs from Node. And then this is what we're using at my company is RabbitMQ. You can use a message bus as a great way to integrate different systems together. So Azure Service Bus or RabbitMQ or some other type of message queuing technology, you can have messages that are published onto a message queue, and you may have some services that are built in .NET and some services built in Node. They're all able to read and send messages on that queue. And the last thing I want to tell you is that you don't need permission to be awesome. So I believe us as software developers, we are living in, and this is no better time to be a software developer than right now. We have so much technology that's available to us. We have the ability to change our world. The companies that we work for, the reason you're here is so that you can learn about new stuff and take that back to your organization and do awesome things. And I can tell you, my experience with Node.js has been just so much fun. It's made me want to excited about being a programmer again. It's just learning new things is such a fun thing to do, and I'm so glad that we live in a world and an industry that allows us to continue to learn and to grow our skills and so forth. And with that, I've got a lot of demos and resources out on this link. I've got a number of repositories that have some Node.js things. There's so there's a lot of resources available from that link. Again, I'm Reverend Geek on the Twitters. I'm a Twitter addict, so that's probably the best way to get a hold of me. And I've got just maybe 4 minutes left for some questions. Anybody got a question? Yes, sir.
So when I'm trying to use Node, especially when I'm trying to upgrade NPM or whatever, and I have Visual Studio installed, sometimes I think it was still using the old Node or the old NPM somehow. I think like Visual Studio is interfering with new installation. Have you experienced that?
So the question's about upgrading Node on and running into some issues with NPM sticking around. I ran into some problems with that early on. Earlier versions of Node, I think, especially if you're trying to upgrade NPM manually over. Yeah, it's a good question. I don't think I've run into that in recent builds of Node.js. I think they've fixed some of those problems on Windows, but definitely the latest version of Node.js tools for Visual Studio does require you to have the latest, like update 3 and those, so there's a number of dependencies that may all be coming into play there that could be messing things up. Yes.
For SQL, do you use any ORM?
So the question is, do you use an ORM with SQL? I do not. Seriate is kind of like, as far as an ORM, it's kind of like you might consider a micro ORM. It's got some very, very lightweight capabilities. JavaScript being a dynamic language already gives you like instant mapping of information that's coming from the database. So you're not having to go through a bunch of hoops to turn the data into some object model or something like that, because JSON is just, the nature of it is just so much less work to do that kind of thing. So I think there are some ORMs that are available, but personally I don't know of any or can recommend any to you.
How do you convert result set to JSON object? Is there a way to convert the result set automatically to a JSON object?
Yeah. So as soon as you get your results back from SQL, it's automatically a JSON object that you can then take, and it's all the properties and things are there. So there's no additional work that has to be done to translate the result set into it's already in JavaScript objects. Yes, sir.
So how do you find refactoring of code without having a compiler, or do you have it?
So refactoring code without a compiler. So having lots of tests is a great way. It's kind of like a discipline to have to catch anything that might happen. There's things like ESLint and JSCS. So ESLint has got some really powerful capabilities to let you know that, hey, you're using things wrong, or this object no longer exists in your code, or can give you some hints on that. But mostly I find it's through having really good tests that can find those things. I know some people use TypeScript, and that's their way of making sure that things are lining up correctly. But ES6, ES 2015, and all the other features with ESLint, I think, provide a really good safety net as well. Yes. So the question's about proxies and authentication through those proxies from Node. Yeah, I don't have a good answer for that. I know we have used like the request object, and it has some basic proxy authentication things. And I know we've contributed ourselves to like the MS SQL package for doing like NTLM authentication. But I don't know. I can help you try to track some things down afterwards. Sure. Well, we are out of time. I will be here for a while longer. You can certainly come up to me and ask questions. Follow me on Twitter. Thank you guys very much.